There is a flat stone that costs $3 at any hardware or farm supply store that sharpens any blade to a sharper edge than any electric sharpener on the market. It removes no more metal than necessary, preserves the geometry of the blade, and produces an edge that holds longer than anything a motorized abrasive wheel can create. Ancient Egyptian bronze workers used it before steel existed, Japanese swordsmiths built entire philosophical traditions around it, and Viking blacksmiths carried pocket-sized versions tied to their belts on every campaign across Europe. The global knife sharpener market was valued at over $800 million in 2024 and is projected to grow toward $1.5 billion by 2033. Electric sharpeners capture over 60% of that market. A $3 flat stone from a hardware store does the same job better, lasts a lifetime, and removes any financial incentive for any company to tell you it exists. Welcome to Forbidden Camping, where we open the vaults the industry welded shut, and let me take you back to where this story begins. Evidence of sharpening stones appears in the archaeological record approximately 75,000 years ago. Researchers at Blombos Cave in South Africa documented grooved silcrete stones bearing the characteristic polish created by repeated blade contact at precisely consistent angles. These were not accidental tool marks, but deliberate, systematic abrasive maintenance of cutting edges by anatomically modern humans, living before any written language, before any settled civilization, before any metallurgy. The practice of maintaining a blade edge through controlled abrasion against a harder mineral surface is older than agriculture, older than pottery, and older than any other documented manufacturing technology in human history. Every civilization that has ever used a blade has independently discovered that a flat stone of appropriate hardness produces and maintains a sharp edge through the simple physics of controlled abrasion. The Egyptians used flat sandstone and limestone slabs to maintain their copper and bronze blades throughout the dynastic period. Greek soldiers carried Cretan stone, a fine-grained siliceous rock from the island of Crete, specifically quarried for blade maintenance. Roman legions maintained dedicated whetstone supplies in their field kit lists alongside oil for metal preservation. The Belgian coticule, a yellowish-gray natural novaculite stone quarried from the Ardennes Mountains, was documented by Roman writers as producing exceptional blade edges and has been continuously quarried from that same deposit for over 2,000 years. Japanese craftspeople developed the most refined whetstone tradition in history, building a graded progression from coarse to medium to fine natural waterstones that could bring a blade to an edge capable of shaving hair from an arm without contact with skin. Every regional blade tradition in every culture on every continent developed its own preferred local stone because the principle was universal and the materials were everywhere. The physics of whetstone sharpening is simple and has never been improved upon by any technology. A blade becomes dull when the apex of the cutting edge folds over microscopically under the lateral forces of cutting. The folded metal apex is called the wire edge or burr, and it cannot cut effectively because it deflects rather than separates material. When a dull blade is drawn across a whetstone at the correct angle, the abrasive particles in the stone remove a small and controlled amount of metal from the face of the bevel on each side of the blade. This abrasion gradually reestablishes the V geometry of the original cutting edge and removes the deformed apex. The finer the abrasive grit of the stone, the smaller the scratch pattern left on the metal, and the finer and more persistent the resulting edge. No electric motor, no rotating carbide wheel, and no pull-through ceramic slot reproduces this controlled geometry better than a skilled hand on a flat stone. Japanese swordsmiths developed the most complete documented understanding of blade geometry and abrasive progression in any culture. The traditional Japanese sharpening system uses a series of water stones called toishi, beginning with coarse stones in the range of 120 to 400 grit for establishing a new bevel or repairing a damaged edge. Medium stones in the 1,000 to 3,000 grit range refine the bevel geometry and begin removing the coarse scratch pattern. Fine finishing stones from 6,000 to 12,000 grit create a polished bevel that produces a mirror-like apex capable of an edge geometry no machine can match. This system has been unchanged in its fundamental structure for over 1,000 years, with the stones used today functionally identical in principle to those used by swordsmiths in the Heian period. The knowledge has not been improved, it has only been made commercially inconvenient. The European whetstone tradition reached its industrial peak in the English county of Yorkshire, where alum shale deposits contained natural abrasive stone ideal for grinding and honing. Yorkshire grindstones powered by watermills sharpened the blades of English industry throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. Sheffield, which became the center of English cutlery manufacturing, built its entire blade trade around a network of grinding wheels, water-powered stones, and hand whetstones. Every cutler, grinder, and bladesmith in that tradition understood that the final edge on any blade came not from the powered grindstone, but from the handheld whetstone used in the finishing stages. The whetstone was the precision instrument, the powered grinder was only the roughing tool. That understanding was common knowledge in every blade-making culture until the industrial production of replacement knives made it commercially preferable for the consumer to buy rather than maintain. The commercial knife sharpener as a consumer product category was born in the mid-20th century, growing alongside the post-war kitchen appliance industry. Before the 1950s, most households owned whetstones and maintained their own knives as a basic domestic skill. Knife sharpening was a routine task performed regularly by anyone who cooked or worked with bladed tools. The generation that lived through the Depression and the Second World War learned knife maintenance because replacing a blade was a significant expense. As post-war prosperity made replacement affordable and the appliance industry began selling convenience as a value proposition, the skills of knife maintenance began to decline. By the 1970s, the electric knife sharpener had been introduced as a kitchen gadget, and by the 1980s, the idea that blade maintenance required a machine with a motor had become the dominant commercial narrative in the consumer market. Electric sharpeners work by drawing the blade through a fixed abrasive slot at a predetermined angle. The abrasive is usually a carbide or ceramic material, and in more expensive models, diamond-coated wheels. The fundamental problem with this approach is that the predetermined angle is fixed by the machine's geometry and may not match the angle at which the blade was originally ground by its manufacturer. When the machine grinds at the wrong angle, it removes more metal than necessary to establish a new apex at the machine's built-in angle rather than the blade's designed angle. Over time, this removes significant amounts of metal from the blade, shortening its useful life dramatically. Professional kitchen knife users consistently report that electric sharpeners destroy expensive blades faster than any other form of maintenance. The electric sharpener market generates hundreds of millions of dollars annually by selling a product that systematically degrades the consumer's knife collection. The pull-through sharpener, the cheapest and most widely sold blade maintenance product, operates on an even more destructive principle. Carbide or ceramic V-shaped notches grip the blade on both sides simultaneously as it is drawn through the slot. The geometry of this contact removes metal aggressively from both sides of the blade simultaneously at a fixed angle that ignores the blade's original geometry. A pull-through sharpener does restore a temporary working edge on a completely neglected blade. It does so by grinding a new angle onto the blade that was not there originally, removing significant amounts of metal to do so. The edge it creates is coarser and less persistent than any edge a whetstone produces. The industry sells pull-through sharpeners as an entry-level product precisely because consumers who use them need to sharpen their blades more frequently, which drives repeat purchases of replacement sharpeners and eventually replacement knives. The whetstone does none of this. A flat whetstone of appropriate grit, used at the correct angle, removes only the minimum amount of metal necessary to restore the blade's original geometry. The correct angle for any blade is easy to determine and easy to maintain by feel once the technique is practiced for 30 minutes. For most Western kitchen knives, the sharpening angle is between 15 and 20 degrees per side. For Japanese knives, the traditional angle is 10 to 15 degrees per side, producing a finer and more acute apex. To find the correct angle, hold the blade flat on the stone surface and raise the spine until the angle matches the factory bevel, visible as the polished flat surface that leads to the edge. That geometry is maintained throughout the sharpening stroke by maintaining consistent spine height above the stone surface. The stroke is a smooth, controlled push of the blade across the stone from heel to tip. The maintenance required to keep a whetstone in working condition is so minimal it barely qualifies as maintenance. Natural and synthetic water stones are used wet, requiring only water to float the metal particles away from the cutting surface during use. Oil stones require a light application of mineral or honing oil that also floats the metal swarf away from the abrasive surface. When a whetstone develops a hollow in its center from repeated use, it is flattened with a diamond lapping plate or by rubbing the stone across wet sandpaper adhered to a flat surface. This is done every few months of regular use, takes about 5 minutes, and returns the stone to a perfectly flat sharpening surface. A quality synthetic whetstone costs between $8 and $25 and lasts years of regular use. Compare that to an electric sharpener costing $60 to $200 that destroys blade geometry and requires replacement of its abrasive components over time. A whetstone costing $3 at a farm supply store is typically a natural novaculite or aluminum oxide stone in the medium grit range of 400 to 600. This single stone is sufficient to maintain any kitchen knife, pocket knife, axe, chisel, or field blade in working condition indefinitely. For a more complete system, adding a fine grit finishing stone at 2,000 to 3,000 grit produces an edge comparable to anything a professional sharpening service provides. Both stones together cost less than $15 at a hardware store and will outlast any electric sharpener on the market. A leather strop finished with chromium oxide polishing compound, which costs $2, and a small piece of old leather belt, adds a final polishing step that professional cutlers have used for centuries. The $3 stone, the $2 strop, and 30 minutes of practice are sufficient to sharpen any blade better than any electric machine sold at any price point. The professional knife sharpening service market was valued at approximately $830 million in 2024, projected to reach over $1 billion by 2030. This market exists entirely because the consumer has been systematically separated from the knowledge and confidence to maintain their own blades. A professional sharpening service uses exactly the same abrasive principles as a whetstone. The professional pulls the blade across a progression of grinding wheels and finishing stones that replicate precisely what any person with a $3 stone can do at home. The labor involved in professional sharpening is measured in minutes per blade. The markup between the cost of that labor and the price charged to the consumer reflects the information gap that has been carefully maintained by an industry that profits from the consumer's ignorance of basic blade geometry and abrasive physics. There is no secret to whetstone sharpening that requires years of training or expensive instruction. The angle must be consistent, which requires attention for the first few sessions before it becomes automatic, and the pressure must be light rather than heavy, which is counterintuitive but correct. The stroke should draw the cutting edge across the stone rather than pushing the spine first, which ensures the abrasive removes metal from the correct face of the bevel. After 5 strokes per side on a medium stone, check for the wire edge by dragging a thumb across the edge at right angles, where the slight roughness indicates the metal has been raised to form a new apex. Switch sides and repeat until the burr is uniform along the entire length of the blade. Move to the fine stone and repeat with lighter pressure until the wire edge breaks away cleanly. Draw the blade gently across the strop 10 times per side and the edge is complete. Some knowledge does not disappear because it is wrong. It disappears because it is free, and free does not generate revenue in a market built on repeat purchases. The whetstone was humanity's primary blade maintenance technology for 75,000 years before the first electric sharpener was ever manufactured, producing the blades of Roman legions, Japanese swordsmiths, Viking craftsmen, and medieval European cutlers. It still produces a better edge than anything with a motor, because physics does not change based on marketing budget. A $3 stone from a hardware store is the same fundamental tool that has maintained every cutting edge humanity has ever depended on. The knife sharpener market worth $800 million in 2024 exists to sell you a worse version of that $3 stone with a motor attached. Subscribe and share this video, because every share puts a whetstone between someone's hands and the store where they were planning to buy their next electric sharpener, and the next vault opens soon.